Mr. Chair.
Marion Street.
Mr. Chair.
Honourable Marion Street.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise to speak to part 2 of the marine legislation bill. And I want to do two things. First of all, I want to reiterate some of the points that my colleague Moanamaki was talking about earlier in response to a call from the Green Party to find out just what Labour's position was on deep-sea drilling. And I keep wondering why they keep asking, because we keep saying it and they keep not hearing it. So I'll say it again. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I beg your pardon. Mr. Chairman, when we talk about deep-sea drilling, it is not clear from anybody's definition what deep-sea means. We have heard, certainly those of us on our side of the House, have certainly heard Greenpeace, for example, say that deep-sea drilling is anything beyond about 200 metres. And I'd be happy to accept that as a definition, because if we were to go in that direction, because 200 metres, and their rationale for 200 metres depth is that that is the depth at which a human diver can go in order to repair any failure of equipment or any spill or any leakage from oil drilling equipment. But, Mr. Chairman, it begs the question about what the criteria are and what the science is that would determine what deep-sea drilling is. Surely the whole point should be about the protection of the environment. And when we have clear criteria for the protection of the marine environment around this area, then we can, this Parliament could expect the Labour Party's support. We don't have that, and we need to consider those issues as a totality before we start sounding off about what we think deep-sea oil drilling is. What is very true is that the deeper one goes in offshore drilling, the greater the pressure on those oil and gas deposits. When the rock holding down those oil deposits, for example, is pierced, the oil emerges of its own volition. They don't have to pump it up to the surface because the pressure of the water is so great that it forces the oil up. And this is what happened at a depth of 2,700 metres in the Gulf of Mexico. And that was the problem. It was too deep, too risky. The pressure was so great that hundreds of thousands of tonnes of oil escaped and were responsible for the degradation of the environment that we have seen subsequently. And so we will have a look at offshore drilling, and we will insist that criteria around offshore drilling are based on environmental protections, not just 200 metres. What makes it better at 199 metres than it is at 201 metres? It all depends on the environment. It depends on the ecosystems. It depends on the benthic areas that are there. It depends on whether or not there are any any benthic protection areas in that domain where the drilling is taking place. So that's the first point, Mr. Chairman. The second one I want to make is in relation to SOP 347 in the name of the Honourable Jerry Brownlee. And this supplementary order paper replaces SOP number 340, and it amends this legislation, making a number of changes to Part 2 of the bill, some of them simply technical amendments, but primarily its purpose is to provide for some discretionary activities to be prescribed as non-notified, Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Marion Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As non-notified activities for which an application for a marine consent is not publicly notifiable. Mr. Chairman, again, we are seeing this government do what it has done in other pieces of legislation, coincidentally or not, which relate to oil and gas exploration, but certainly with respect to oil and gas exploration, that allows, is much more lenient, let me put it that way, is much more lenient on oil and gas companies than anybody else. And to deprive the public of their right to have a say on whether or not exploratory drilling should happen off their shores is an affront to democracy. It's as simple as that. And it's clear from this government's previous behaviour that that is how it intends to proceed when that tricky little business of democratic participation gets in the way. We will ride roughshod over it, and we will find ways of writing out of the legislation any requirements for public consultation. And that's what this amendment does. It is a travesty, and there are people, including the Gisborne District Council Committee, which is, because of its own experience with the possibility of offshore drilling, exploratory or otherwise, that they are looking to oppose this particular provision because they want to have a say. Doesn't matter whether offshore drilling is something that is likely or unlikely to happen for those people. What they want is the ability to have their say. And so how can any potentially adverse impacts on the environment be assessed if it is only going to be up to the EPA to determine and to give permission for things when they do not have their own investigative capacity? One other thing, Mr. Chairman, that I just want to draw attention to in the supplementary order paper is this minister's particular penchant for regulations which are so broad-ranging as to be likely to be used to undermine the original purpose of the legislation. So it says here in 29AB in Supplementary Order Paper 347, the Governor-General may, by order in Council made on the recommendation of the Minister, make regulations that prescribe requirements, methods or technical standards for emergency dumping of waste or other matter. I'll use this one as an example, Mr. Chair, because it's talking about emergency dumping of waste, which is a particular consideration. But it will be the Governor-General, on the recommendation of the Minister, who makes the requirements, who makes the regulations that prescribe the requirements, methods or technical standards. Now, how is it the Minister's responsibility to determine those regulations without any scrutiny from this Parliament? That is not appropriate. We know this minister because of his track record with road user charges and all sorts of other things. We know his track record and his protege Simon Bridges' track record in bringing in SOPs after select committee reports have returned to the House, that they have no regard for anything other than the agenda to which they are committed. That is, drill and mine everything we can in order to get some economic improvement because we lack imagination to do anything differently. And that is at the heart of this. And so even democracy gets in the way of any economic improvement that might be an alternative to drilling and mining. And Mr. Chairman, it's this lack of imagination and lack of a plan to modernise our economy that is going to be the death of this government. Because sticking as it is...
Mike Sabin.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm not sure that member is well placed to be talking about the death of the government, given the bloodshed that's been occurring.